Good evening. This is the regular meeting of the Ojai Planning Commission, November 20th, 2013. Members of the public wishing to address the Planning Commission on items appearing on the agenda are requested to complete a speaker's card and file it with the Secretary prior to the start of the meeting. Cards are available in the lobby. Speakers should state their name and address for the record and limit your comments to 3 minutes or less. Comments must be directed to the Commission and not to the audience. While Planning Commission is in session, all in attendance are expected to maintain order and decorum and obey orders of the Chair. Roll call, please.
Crabtree, Foster, Nolan.
Here.
Becker.
Here.
Merck.
Here.
Nicklin.
Here.
Osborne.
Here.
Commissioner Nolan, the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Public communications. The public communications item is for members of the public wishing to address the Planning Commission on items of city business other than scheduled agenda items. Matters raised at this time may be briefly discussed by the Commission and will generally be referred to staff and or placed on a subsequent agenda. Under state law, other than for emergency items, no action or non-agendized items can be taken at this meeting. We're going to go ahead and start the public hearing. Item number 1, the 2014-2021 Housing Element Update. And we'll go to staff, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. I'd like to make a few comments and then turn it over to John Douglas, our housing consultant. As I think you know, the Housing Element Update is something that's required periodically by the state of California through its laws. And we're really under the gun this year because they've established a deadline for Cycle 5 of 120 days past October 15th, which is about February 12th. But not only that, since the last cycle, they've created some sanctions so that for cities who don't certify a housing element by the deadline, you get put into a 4-year review cycle instead of an 8-year review cycle, which could be a very onerous requirement for us or for anyone else. So we've been working with you and with the community and with the City Council trying to put together a housing element that reflects Ojai values more so than the Cycle 4 one did. And I think, and so the process is we prepare a draft housing element. You reviewed that, the council reviewed that and authorized us to submit it to HCD to make comments. And part of the certification process is that HCD needs to get a 60-day review period. They make their comments and then we have to respond to those before we adopt our housing element. So the primary purpose tonight is to respond to the comments that HCD made, and those are contained in a letter that you have with your agenda packet. I just wanted to point out that there are a number of things that were very high priorities for the city that HCD did not comment on, and that's a very good thing. And first and foremost is the height limit that we've established for the affordable housing overlay zone at 2 stories rather than 3 stories. And if you recall, last time around, HCD did raise the issue of 3 stories, and that was quite a controversial issue. But there's a number of other things that we have in our SLP zone that were not commented on that I think are also very important to us. We have a design review requirement. We have an environmental compliance requirement. We have a water and sewer availability requirement, acoustic attenuation, stormwater control, biological resource protection, archaeological resource protection, historic resource protection, traffic control measures, viewshed protection and community context requirements, sustainable building construction requirements, and some other forms of regulatory compliance. So even though the overlay zone allows for or requires that the affordable housing that's built under it be a ministerial approval. There's quite a list of things that are not being questioned that I think are very important to us in making those administrative approvals. So that's sort of the end of my comment on the HCD letter, and we'll let Mr. Douglas go through that letter step by step in the response. But there is one other issue I wanted to comment on that has come up at the city council level and that we're proposing a change to, and that has to do with the requirement for a residential property report at the termination of the second unit compliance program. One of the ways in which we met the housing requirements in the fourth cycle, and that program's again included in the fifth cycle, is to provide what was originally called an amnesty period and is now called a compliance period to bring second units, to create an opportunity for second units that are not permitted now to become permitted in legal bona fide units. As part of that program, we had established a requirement that once this program was done, whenever there's a sales transaction with a residential property, there'd be a requirement that the seller offer to pay for a residential property report. And that residential property report would then be produced by the city staff and provided to the buyer, so they'd be aware of whatever is in the records of the city regarding the property. And the real estate community has brought up some concerns about that. And so the city council has been listening to those concerns, and really this is the opportunity to make a change. So we're recommending, and we did give you a supplement that has this recommendation, that requirement be dropped, and that instead we say the city will work in coordination with other stakeholder agencies to establish programs that promote code compliance and maintenance of existing housing stock. And then there was also the concern that the startup of the program has taken longer than expected, and so a June 30 of 2014 deadline is not a realistic deadline. So instead we've put in language saying that we would establish a participation period of approximately 1 year, and that gives the council flexibility to set the appropriate ending date. So those are the comments that I have, and I would then turn it over to John to summarize what the HCD had to say and how he's recommended that we address that.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, good evening. The focus of my remarks tonight is going to be on the 3-page matrix that is in your staff report packet. This actually would become an attachment to the resolution that, if it's your pleasure, to adopt tonight. And this summarizes the content of HCD's review letter and then how the city proposes to respond to those. Before I launch into the details of this, though, I think I just like to refresh the Commission's memory. I know we've talked in previous meetings about what does HCD certification mean, how does the process work, and why is it important. So I just want to very quickly summarize those topics. The state legislature has given HCD the authority to review the housing element and to give its opinion. It's an opinion, it's not the law. What the law does say, though, is that cities, before they adopt a housing element, have to consider HCD's comments. Now, sometimes cities find it a frustrating process because there isn't any due process. There is no appeals board for HCD's opinion. They give their opinion, and then at the end of the process, if HCD's opinion is that the housing element fully complies with state law, then you are what's considered in compliance, or the slang term is certified. Having that letter from HCD saying that you're in compliance is very important from a legal standpoint, because there are some nasty consequences that could happen, primarily through legal challenges to cities that don't have that letter of compliance. From a legal standpoint, having HCD's opinion that we're in compliance carries with it what the lawyers call a presumption of validity. So if someone challenges the city, they have the burden of proof to demonstrate that the city and HCD are wrong, rather than the city having the burden to demonstrate that it's right and HCD is wrong. So that's an important benefit to having that letter. When HCD gives a letter, they raise questions and concerns. Some of those are of a serious policy nature, and some of them are relatively minor technical details that are easily handled. We have some of both kinds in this letter, and so as we go through, I'll try to point out what HCD is really getting at. Sometimes you have to read between the lines, and they will couch things in certain language that, just from experience, those of us that deal with them a lot know what they really mean, even though it may not explicitly say in plain English what they mean. So with that introduction, it's our goal, and it's my firm belief that the city can address these if the Planning Commission and the City Council is willing to work with these concerns and work with the suggestions that staff has. So with that, let me start off referring to our matrix here. The first comment from HCD has to do with what's referred to as the realistic capacity of the sites. Now, as you recall from the previous housing element, the SPL overlay was the city's primary vehicle for addressing the low-income RHNA numbers. And so HCD is asking for more information to demonstrate that the capacity of those SPL sites meets the requirement. And so we've made some extensive revisions to Appendix B, providing additional information in the table, describing more information about each of the sites and why we think they have the capacity that we show in that appendix. It's also important, and HCD doesn't really mention this in this portion of their letter, but there's a provision of state law that's referred to as no net loss. What that means is when cities estimate a certain capacity for sites in their housing element, then the city may not approve projects at a lower density or a lower yield than is estimated in the housing element unless they can make findings that there's enough capacity someplace else in the city to make up the shortfall. So just for example, if the city estimates that a site can accommodate 40 units, and then next year a project comes through at 30 units and the city wants to approve that project, they have to make findings that there's capacity for 10 more units someplace else, and that's referred to as no net loss. And so the city has not done any detailed architectural or site planning studies on any of these sites, so the estimated capacity is based on educated guess. Now, if a project comes forward on some of those sites and the detailed engineering and architectural studies lead to a project that has a different number of units than what's estimated in this capacity, then the city will be bound by that principle of no net loss. And so that's part of our argument to HCD, is that we've made a good faith effort to estimate the capacity, but if it turns out that a project comes forward at a fewer number of units, then we're obligated to either not approve the project or to find capacity someplace else. So we feel that the changes to the housing element in conjunction with that principle of no net loss adequately addresses the state's concerns on that point. Then staying with the SPL properties, they have a question regarding the suitability of non-vacant sites. In housing element law, there is a higher test, a higher scrutiny when a property is not vacant. And the theory behind it is vacant land is the easiest to develop. If it's not vacant, then there there needs to be demolition, there's cost involved with demolition and clearance, and it makes the project a little bit more difficult to pull off. And so the state legislature has inserted some more stringent rules in terms of evaluating the realistic capacity of non-vacant sites. So it's important to note that 4 of the 8 SPL sites are vacant, and some of them, even the ones that are not entirely vacant, substantial portions of them are vacant. So we've added more information to identify those sites that are not vacant, what's on the property, and why do we think that they present a realistic capacity for redevelopment. So with regard to that second line item in the chart, I believe that we've provided an appropriate response to address that question. They also asked a question regarding the process, how the ultimate decision was made regarding the SPL sites. And they noted that at an earlier stage of the process, there were some different sites that were indicated as being the most suitable for having the SPL designation. So there was a change from the initial identification of the SPL sites as part of the last housing element process through the implementation, where there was additional analysis, discussion, public input, and so forth that led to the final decision of the SPL sites. And so we've provided a little bit more information in the housing element, simply explaining that through the public participation process, additional public hearings with your commission, with the council, there was some changes made to the ultimate decision on which SPL sites were selected. So we feel that we've addressed that concern. The next question they raise has to do with what's referred to as small sites. And this is a common HCD concern and comment that shows up in letter after letter. HCD believes that the sweet spot for affordable housing development is sites that are somewhere in the neighborhood of 2, 3, 4 acres, because the majority of projects that receive tax credit funding have somewhere in the range of 40 to 80 units. And so there's economies of scale there. And so when a city's identifying smaller sites as meeting their requirement, then HCD often raises this issue of, well, you've got small sites in here. How are you going to justify using those sites as realistic for meeting affordable housing objectives? Oftentimes, what cities do when they're asked this question is they come up with an incentive program that provides a slight density bump when sites are consolidated to make a larger building site. And I've personally worked with a number of cities that have, in response to this question, they've offered up a program that says, okay, we understand that it can be more difficult with a small site, so we're going to provide incentives for consolidating 2, 3 adjacent properties to create a more viable building site. And one of the ways you can do that is providing a small density bonus apart from the ordinary density bonus law. And so for this program, we're suggesting that the city amend the program number 6 to allow an additional density increase of 5% when 2 or more parcels are aggregated to create a building site that's at least 1 acre. This is a fairly typical way of dealing with that concern from HCD. But that represents a change to development standards and therefore a policy concern for your commission and for the city council. Next question is a very, very important one. HCD raises the question of whether or not the city's adoption of the SPL adequately and properly addressed the requirements from the previous planning period. This is very important and critical because in the worst case scenario, if it's determined that the SPL did not meet all the legal standards, then HCD could say that the city is not allowed to take any credit for those SPL sites because they didn't meet all the rules. We believe that the SPL zone does meet the rules, but some clarification is probably going to be necessary. And so we have put some additional language into the housing element to clarify and to make some commitments to refining and tweaking in order to make sure that HCD agrees with us that the SPL zone does accommodate our previous need, and so that there is no additional RENA numbers that roll over into the new planning period. For example, one of the requirements in state law is that when a city has to rezone property, like Ojai did in the last period, that the sites that are rezoned have to allow a minimum density of 20 units per acre. And HCD will look to the actual language in the ordinance to see whether those words, minimum density, are in there. And so we need to convince HCD that it is the policy of the city that there is a minimum density of 20 units per acre on those sites. And we can support that assertion with language that's in the housing element itself, because if you go back and look at the housing element that was adopted last year, there is language in Program 6 that says minimum density. And so, as you know, the general plan is a higher order document than the zoning, and the zoning must be consistent with the general plan. And so our argument is that the general plan establishes that minimum density of 20 units per acre. And so even if the wording in the ordinance appears to be missing that it's this policy of the city, and so we conform with that state requirement. The next question, labeled number A4, is one of these minor, your taillight is burned out type of a thing when the police officer stops you. And in fact, I just realized today that we had not put the change into the draft housing element that went out in the staff report packet. This question is, what are the city's standards for street improvements? What width of pavement is required? It's a standard requirement. And so we've added, we will add, it's not in the packet that went out to you, but we will insert that the city's requirement is a 40-foot section, curb to curb, for a new street. And that includes 12-foot travel lanes and then 8-foot parking lanes to add up to 40 feet. And then typically there's a right-of-way, a dedication right-of-way of about 60 feet that includes room for sidewalks and parkway on either side. So it's just a technical addition to the housing element that HCD asked us to clarify. The next item is another significant policy issue. It has to do with density bonus law. State law requires every city to adopt regulations that are consistent with state density bonus law that says when a developer voluntarily provides affordable housing, well, actually voluntarily or not, whenever a developer provides affordable housing in a project, that cities have to grant, if requested by the developer, they have to grant a density increase up to 35%, depending on the percentage of affordable units in the project, or some modifications or waivers to development standards in order to make the project feasible. So the way the SPL ordinance is written, it says in essence that the SPL is already acting as a density bonus by granting 20 units per acre on those sites. And so those SPL sites are not eligible for an additional density bonus. But we don't believe that it's allowable for the city to exclude density bonus on those SPL sites. And so we're recommending that the housing element clarify and commit to clarifying that in the SPL ordinance. There was actually a case on this, court case, out of the county of Napa just recently, where the county said that, well, if a developer's providing affordable units because they're required through our inclusionary ordinance, then they're not eligible for density bonus. And the court said, no, you have to grant the density bonus even if they are required affordable units. Next question is also a policy matter regarding occupancy standards. You'll recall that when the SPL ordinance was adopted, it included affordability standards for projects within the SPL that required 15% extremely low, 15% very low, 15% low, and 20% moderate. So 65% of the units, in order to take advantage of the SPL overlay, 65% of the units had to be affordable. And also that between 30 and 50% of the units had to be senior. HCD raised that as a red flag. This is one of those things where they don't come right out and say that it's not permissible to have those affordability standards, but they say that this should be analyzed as a potential constraint to development. What that means, reading between the lines, translating HCD's words into intent, it means that they believe that that's too onerous of a requirement. I remember, 10 years ago or so, the city of Goleta, which was a recently incorporated city, was going back and forth with HCD over their housing element. And the city tried a similar requirement, an inclusionary requirement of 50 or 55% of all new housing in the city. And HCD rejected it, wouldn't certify their housing element. And to this day, Goleta does not have a certified housing element. So based on my familiarity with other cities and what HCD has done in the past, it appears to me, it's my opinion, that Ojai would need to reduce those affordability percentages in order to get HCD to certify the housing element. And so we've suggested what is a fairly common affordability requirement of 10% very low, 10% low, and 5% low, with no requirement for senior housing. Doesn't mean the city can't negotiate for a senior project or approve a senior project. Some of the properties are owned by the city, and so that control that the city has through ownership gives the city the flexibility to negotiate for over and above the minimum. But it's our suggestion that we make we ask the city council to make a commitment to reduce those percentages for the SPL. The next issue was the minimum and maximum densities, and this is, in my mind, this is related to the density bonus issue. HCD says, well, you establish a maximum density of 20 units per acre in the SPL, but the minimum density is 20 units per acre. So that doesn't leave much flexibility for a developer to design a project. Well, the answer is, I believe part of the answer is, yes, the minimum density is 20 units per acre, but also if a project complies with the affordability requirements, then it's automatically going to qualify for a density bonus. So now you have an actual density range of 20 to 27 or 28 units per acre if it qualifies for the full 35% density bonus. So I don't believe any policy change is needed other than the one that we already talked about with regard to the density bonus. The next issue has to do with transitional and supportive housing. This was a new law that was passed and took effect in 2008. Passed in 2007, took effect in 2008, requiring that cities allow transitional and supportive housing as residential uses under the same standards and procedures that any conventional residential use is allowed. And so the city amended the municipal code to establish that transitional and supportive housing was allowed in residential zones, but did not mention other zones such as commercial zones where mixed use would be allowed. So the application of this new state law says any place that residential is permitted, whether it's a commercial zone or a residential zone, then the same rule applies. Transitional and supportive housing has to be permitted under the same standards and regulations that would pertain to ordinary residential uses. So this would require an amendment to the code to specify that commercial zones are also included within that definition for transitional and supportive housing. Comment number B1 in their letter is referring back to earlier comments, and so I don't think any additional discussion is needed on comment B1. On their comment B2, they make reference to a recent change in state law that says cities must explicitly describe how they're going to facilitate lower income housing, including housing for the extremely low income segment of the population. So this is, you might consider it a technical, insert an additional explicit reference to extremely low income households that the city will attempt to facilitate if it is feasible to do so. A similar situation exists for persons with developmental disabilities. There was an amendment to state law calling out developmental disabilities as explicitly within the framework of persons with other types of disabilities. And so HCD is looking for the city to just include that specific reference to housing for persons with developmental disabilities as being within the range of housing for all types of persons that the city will attempt to facilitate to the extent that it's feasible to do so. Their last comment, comment B3, is again referring back to some of the previous remarks in their letter. And so that concludes my presentation to you with regard to HCD's letter, unless you have any specific questions that you'd like to go back to.
Any questions for?
I have a question.
Yes.
Let's see, let me find where it was at. It was A for the on and off-site improvements. And let's see, I think the comment was that you were going to add back in, because it was excluded, the 40-foot street width. Is that like a state standard, or can we actually put in like that we would comply with our complete streets policy?
Yes, it is. There are general rules of thumb for public works improvement standards, and I think most counties have like a standard plans manual that specifies if you're going to build new streets on our jurisdiction, this is the cross sections. But yes, with regard to complete streets, it does not preclude the city from adopting complete streets policies and facilitating other, bicycle lanes, other types of things. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Any other questions from the Commission?
Mr. Douglas, could you go back over this changing of the percentage of low-income housing from 65% down to 25%?
Yes.
We had an extensive discussion about how we wanted to do that. It resulted in the 65%, and I'm a little shocked that we are suddenly cutting that more than in half. So I'd like some really significant justification for doing that.
Let me try to give a little bit more background. Inclusionary housing, that is policies that require development to provide certain percentages of affordable units. That that kind of a requirement is called inclusionary housing. The state law and state HCD look at inclusionary housing from two sides. On the one hand, from two directions. On the one hand, it has the potential to create more affordable housing units. On the other hand, it can pose a constraint on housing development in general because it adds to the cost. If a developer has to subsidize some portion of the project by raising the price on another portion of the project, then that's viewed as a potential constraint to housing development in general. HCD takes the position that inclusionary housing is a voluntary policy position that cities may take or they may choose not to take. If they choose not to adopt inclusionary rules, then that's fine. The state has no grounds to criticize the city. If a city does choose to impose inclusionary requirements, whether in general or whether as part of a specific ordinance like the SPL, then state HCD says that you must analyze it to make sure that it is reasonable and analyze the extent to which it poses a constraint to development in general. And so just from my experience observing HCD and being involved with cities that have had inclusionary requirements, what I have seen is that when you get above the percentage of around 25%, then HCD starts to get uncomfortable with it. Now, I certainly can't sit here tonight and say that 25% will pass HCD's approval and 45% or 35% would not. There is no objective written standard any place that I'm aware of that says what affordability level HCD will accept and where the line is that they will not accept. So the 25% that we've suggested is because there are other jurisdictions, quite a few other jurisdictions, that have adopted inclusionary requirements in the ballpark of 25%, and they have been accepted by HCD. I haven't done a recent comprehensive survey of all jurisdictions in the state or even a representative sample of jurisdictions in the state to see if there's any who have a higher percentage than 25% that have been accepted by HCD. So this is a judgment call on my part, really, in terms of suggesting what I think HCD will accept.
Yes. Could I ask John a question? A number of the sites, about half the sites, are owned by the city. Is there anything that precludes the city from going to a higher percentage on their properties if they want to, even if we have this lower threshold in the housing element?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. Since the city controls some of the sites, then of course the city has more control over what ultimately can be built there. And through a development agreement, for example, or the city could enter into an agreement with the ultimate developer seeking over the minimum requirement that's established in the ordinance. So what we're talking about is the baseline, what's required in the ordinance as a minimum, but for those sites that the city owns, the city's free to negotiate for a higher level of affordability.
May I ask a question? I think what John Merck was referring to is perhaps that for a private developer, if we made the requirement 65%, the developer may feel there's absolutely no money in it for him, and he would walk away from it. Is that what the HCD is thinking? So that it will be an impediment to development?
Yes, through the chair responding, that's the idea. It would be 65% poses too difficult of a hurdle for a developer to make a project pencil out.
Does that answer your question, John? No. Any other questions?
I don't have any questions.
And I'd like to open the public hearing. And I have a speaker card, Mr. Daddy.
Well, in view of the fact that we're the 8th poorest city out of a city of 10 in the county of Ventura, I would certainly like us to explore the maximum acceptable percentage. I would be humiliated if I found out that Santa Monica got a 45% and we settled for a 25%. So I would like to make sure that we see what the absolute highest level of affordable is in the state. We see where they are on the economic range. We see where we are. And we see if we can't move that up. Because if we have cities that have a higher level than the 25%, then we know that they've already accepted it. We also know that, and I'm really going to try to stay out of the rest of that, I have a different focus. And the focus is on the second units. HCD says all second units are affordable housing. And we have this compliance program. And I would like to make sure that by your resolution tonight, it doesn't preclude us, inhibit us, stop us, restrict us from making changes to any of the components of the second unit. We have deed restrictions, we have lot size, we have housing size, we have a whole bunch of unanswered questions. We're looking at change in the time frame. And so I'd like to make sure that your resolution will allow us to go forward as we discover what this is. Now, what we have is a couple of different numbers. One is 52 authorized permits. One is 70 identified units. So that gives us a little bit of head start on what those numbers were. I have no opinion on what the total numbers are. I have no opinion on what the RENA numbers are or the other numbers, but I want to make sure that we get these affordable units in here. And we have a lot of unanswered questions, processes, and procedures. And we've had people that have had these permits paid for a while. And we're going to have to develop this, and we just want to make sure that as we develop it and we discover what happens, there's a process that allows us to make allowances to get these things compliant. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public? Yes, thank you.
Well, first of all, I want to say that I agree with what Bob said. I hope that if you adopt that resolution tonight, it doesn't prevent us from changing some of the language around the second unit program. And also, regarding Chapter 16, I hope that we will still be able to eliminate that. But one question I have for Mr. Douglas is, so can you give me an idea of what the breakdown is for affordable, extremely low and low and low? I mean, how does that, the last time I heard those figures, affordable didn't sound very affordable. And I was just wondering if you have some numbers around that.
Mr. Chair, would you like me to respond now? Or
Please, yes,
okay.
thank you.
Is your question asking what is the affordability that translates into extremely low and very low?
Exactly.
Okay. Under state law, extremely low means a household whose income is no more than 30% of the county-wide median. And there's actually a chart in the housing element that shows what those numbers are in terms of annual income, in terms of rent, and in terms of an estimated purchase price. So extremely low means, and I can even tell you pretty quickly what page that is on, but extremely low refers to no more than 30% of the county median income. Very low means no more than 50%. And this is on page 19 of the housing element. Low means no more than 80%, and moderate means no more than 120%. In terms of monthly rent, for a standard four-person household, in the extremely low, it would be $670 a month. Very low would be $1,116 a month. Low would be $1,780 a month, and moderate is $2,679. So even at the low, quote-unquote, low-income level, we're talking about approaching market rate for apartments. It's the very low and the extremely low that is the real challenge for affordable housing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public would like to make any comments or questions, please?
I move we close the public hearing.
Second.
Aye. We'll turn over to commission discussion.
Sure. So to answer the other question, my understanding is we can make changes kind of as indicated. That's for purposes of getting the plan in, which we need to do by February. We can still revamp the amnesty program as needed.
Yeah, the housing element's a very high policy level document, and the language is about 2 paragraphs long as far as the compliance program goes. The regulations that the Board of Appeals is working on can be changed however they want to make them more flexible and simple.
And then on the other question, just a little bit of the background on what Commissioner Merck was addressing. I actually spent quite a bit of time with Rob Mullane when we were working on this inclusionary housing issue, and we were trying to push the envelope on that. I'm sure you read that, and it was kind of interesting to me to see if HCD would pick up on it. Obviously they did. We did know at the time that generally those fall in the range of 15 to 25% in other communities. So with eyes wide open, we knew that that was the case. But it doesn't dismiss the idea we still would like to push the envelope. I'm just not sure how to do that, or if it will harm our getting the 8-year cycle. We don't want to do that. And I wouldn't want to do that as a commissioner. I prefer us try and get an 8-year cycle versus a 4-year. But if there's some information that you can bring back that might be helpful with other communities being able to get away with higher densities, even if there was a additional bonus put forth if they went into that might be something that we could accommodate. And actually would make the affordable housing advocates happier as well, I would think, if there was something like that. And that was kind of part of it too. We have people in the community would like to see, they don't quite understand the relationship financially with private development. And I certainly do when you do the numbers. These things really just don't make a lot of sense. That's the problem for private developers. But when we're working with third party, maybe on some of our project sites, it can make a lot of sense. But in that case, we have full control, so we could put in, 100% affordable if we wanted to. So that's something we can think about. And we've always got that option, which is, to me, a very good argument for our what we've submitted, is that we control these sites. My concern is that it seems like every cycle we go on, this state becomes a little more, looking for compliance, looking for what, and what I worry about is we are always showing very little numbers of actual numbers. And so the idea that I put forth a while back was building an inventory of potentially affordable housing in the future, which was the idea of allowing people to develop second units on existing properties. And then, looking at that as a potential inventory for future affordable housing that could really be actually put into place through financial incentives or otherwise. A lot of folks, as they get older, they need tax credits, or they need ways to lower their passive income, things like that. But when you don't have a stock of housing to go to provide that incentive that we could do in a future cycle, that can become a problem. So I think what we need to look to do in the future, not in this cycle, is some sort of program to encourage lot owners that are on, small to large lots to build second units. And
I think it also is a very real thing that people will need to have their parents move in, or or vice versa, their kids move in, so they get the same economic opportunity that we have in this community. So I don't want to belabor that, but I think that's something we need to keep in the back of our minds. So, other than that, I felt that you addressed everything very well, and it looks good. You know, looks good to me. I'm really glad to hear that we can go in and make changes to the amnesty program. The other thing that, by the way, on that amnesty, I just recalled was one thing that we had talked about when we were doing the design of the amnesty program was we didn't like the short period. And I think all of us that were here at the time were in no way supporting a one-year period. In fact, what we talked about doing is having, like a 24-month period where you would have obviously no fees, no to low fees. And then if you came in after that period, the fees might go higher. There'd be increased penalties. And the reason is economically, some people can't afford to do this, or they don't want to raise their head above the water, perhaps. And we really want to encourage people to come in. And so if you put a short time period, a short fuse on it, they're not going to come in. So I would like to see that rewritten the way we had intended as commissioners, which was let's do a long period that encourages people to come in. No fees, free review, no look back, no penalties, no code enforcement, ombudsman type review in the first 24 months. Maybe in the second 24 months, there's a $500 fee to apply. The same provisions apply after that. And then even after that, the fees may go up every 2 years, so that we always have a program or an avenue for current homeowners or new homeowners, because these homes get bought and sold a lot in Ojai, to rectify the problem and make that unit legal. And it would also allow us to build our stock, which we say we're going to do. And I'm afraid that if we don't do that, in the future, the state could look back and say, well, Ojai, you've been turning in plans, all the time, but you really haven't done anything. So they may look at us a little different in the future, and that scares me. So anyways, that's it.
Any other discussion, comments?
Well, I agree with Troy, and that was our intention. And I guess the question is it too late, or is that something we can actually put into the next
Yeah, in fact,
submittal?
The language that we passed out on page 53, on item 3C, it says, as it's been rewritten, it says a period of 1 year. So you might want to change that to reflect the discussion that we've just had.
Okay.
Maybe you talked about multiple phases of 2 years or something like that.
Right.
So I don't think you have to be very specific, but make it open to allow that to happen.
And then we could, in the background over this next year, put in the detail on that.
Yeah, so the housing element has a very general statement. Then the council can adopt an ordinance that has more specifics, and then the guidelines can even be more specific. So I think for purpose of the housing element, you need to indicate multiple phases of approximately 2 years, and then we can work on the details when we get to the ordinance.
We don't need to make a motion to make that change. You could just do that, or what?
You could adopt I'm sorry. You could adopt the resolution. First, recommend that change be made, but then adopt the resolution with that change in place. So I think you can.
And our comments will go to city council, right?
The minutes, yes.
Minutes. Okay, good. Perhaps one of us could be present at that meeting to go over this.
I just like. Sorry, I'd like to echo Commissioner Becker and Commissioner Nolan's comments as well. And then just reading through these changes, I think they've been adequately addressed, and I'm pretty happy with them, and not going into what you've said. I think it's pretty well said. So that's my comments. Thank you. So,
I have a question. I would just like to ask our consultant, Mr. Douglas, your response to the state, it seems reasonable. It just seems to catch me by surprise, though, and I was just wondering, did you caution us when we were making our draft that these were maybe too ambitious goals, or did that just sort of come out when the state issued its comments?
You're referring to the affordability requirement?
Yes, the affordability housing. I'm just wondering, it just seems like we're kind of surprised by it. I'm just wondering if you were surprised by that, or if you were pointing this out when we were making our draft, which I don't recall.
I can't claim any pride of authorship because the SPL ordinance was done before I came on board. But I do remember reviewing it after I got involved with the city, and I have to say I'm not shocked by HCD bringing that up as a concern.
Yeah, to answer your question a little further, because obviously I was around working very hard with Rob Mullane on this, and I'm not surprised by the response. When you do the housing element, you essentially can put in there what you want to propose. And there was guidance given as to whether things can work or they won't work. But this was kind of a creative idea that we had thought up, and we thought, well, we can try it, and if it doesn't work, we can change it back. And it was the one thing that we actually spent quite a bit of time on discussion. Commissioner Merck's correct. I mean, we went over it quite a bit, and it just didn't fly. But again, I think we should, if you can, find out what other communities that had pushed the limit came up with, and that might be helpful.
All right,
thanks. I don't know if it pleases, it's okay with the chair. I would like to open up the public hearing in case anyone out there, and we've got a couple of appeals board members, I think, who did want to, before we close this out, readdress anything we brought up. Does anybody do you want to readdress?
Open the public hearing again?
Allow the opportunity. Okay, I move to reopen the public hearing.
Thank you.
Second.
I'd just like to say that I really appreciate Troy Becker's comments on the fee adjustment. I think that the way it is currently written, it's very, very hard on landlords, and it will be really difficult on tenants because landlords aren't, in many cases, going to spend a lot of money and not going to be able to, and so we lose the tenant, and that affects our RENA numbers, and it's just not good. So if we can do something with the fees and make it more reasonable, I think that'll help a lot. So I really like that. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Daddy.
Unless rain is going to go away, and I don't believe it is, we're going to always have a new housing element. We're always going to have affordability. And this future housing stock, we always need to plant that. We always need to get that going. And so by putting this thing in rather than a 1 year or a 2 year, it needs to be a forever cycle. We can graduate it over time, but it doesn't end. I mean, if it's going to end, then put in a final date and be done with it. But I agree, we need to get these things going, and I think what will happen is, we kicked the can down the road 9 years last time. If it's 3, 4, however many years, we haven't built anything, we're going to have some serious problems. And I'm going to digress, and it's going to be very unpopular, and that's just the way it's going to be. I'm not really sure I'm all fired up about 8 years. I mean, I don't see anybody in here being in the chair they're in 8 years. When this comes up 8 years from now, where are we going to get our institutional memory? We're going to say, gee, what did we do, and why did we come up with this decision, and what happened here, and what was the thinking, and now we start over. We've already done that in the past. It didn't work. And I almost think that I would hate to have an 8-year-old cell phone. I would hate to have an 8-year-old plan that we just kept going, and I'm not all that sure that going back through this in 4 years as our very first attempt to actually legitimize, put this thing on, do the SPLs, get the second units, do the compliance, not amnesty, and get these things going. I'm not really sure that we really want to extend this out 8 years. Yes, it's a staff issue, but the world changes. Take a look at everything we have now we didn't have 4 years ago. So, again, I think a shorter period of time, not this long institutional time, is going to be best. So, whatever your thoughts are.
I'm not, you mean, Bob, on the second housing, you're talking about the second units?
No, I'm talking about the entire 8 years. When we do the housing element for 8 years, we don't have to look for 8 years. We put up a cement wall for 8 years.
Could we,
And
excuse me, could
I'm
we just
sorry,
address the chair?
I'm sorry.
Yes,
And
thank
and
you.
I just think that 8 years is too long for future planning. If you're off a couple of degrees for 8 years, you travel out there, you're missing the entire galaxy. And this city has changed. We're now under 7,000 people. That little sign out there that says 8202 is desperately wrong. We're under 7,000 residents. In 8 years, we're projected, we're going to be under the 6,000 mark probably. The other indicators show it going up, but that's not what really is happening. So take a look, 8 years. How right were all your predictions from 8 years ago as to where we'd be today? What did we develop in that 8-year period of time? We may find we don't have anywhere near enough water, not in 8 years or 7 years. We may find out in 3 or 4 years we have a whole different situation that we have to deal with. So that's what my thought is. I believe 8 years is too long. Thank you.
Anyone else from the floor? I'd make a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll second that.
So would we like to
We need an
make
all
a
in
resolution?
favor.
Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So would we like to make a motion? You ready for that?
I can try. Okay. Make a motion to accept the addendum to the final EIR adopted for the City of Ojai 2006-2014 housing element and adopt PC resolution number 20, recommending City Council approval of the housing element as revised with the following change. On the draft element, page 53, item C, establish a period of participation, approximately change 1 to 2 years. And I'll hold there. Was any other changes?
Well, did we want to say, pertaining to item C, a 2-year cycle, but then also with additional multiple phases? But do we want to include anything about the fees? I don't know if we can say anything about the fees, but maybe the multiple phases so that it continues beyond the 2 years?
I think that may be too much detail for this policy document. I mean, there's no fees. It just, if you look at A, paragraph A, for instance, it just kind of describes a general approach. So I don't think we need to go to that level of detail at this document.
What's the opinion from staff on that? Do you need more detail on that?
I don't think it would hurt. You know, it does say, we have to adopt ordinances that are consistent with the housing element. So if the housing element specifies that we use the fees that were applicable at the time of initial construction, it'd be hard to go lower than that. So we might want to just say by reducing fees and not take out the reference to whatever was applicable at whatever time. And that gives flexibility to deal with it in the resolution.
Okay, so back on, and to strike the language referring to the fees applicable at the time of building, and to change that language that staff deems necessary to encourage low or no fees for units that are to encourage low or no fees for expeditious. I don't know what the word is, conversion of units or development of units?
So we can tweak the
Can you
language.
figure that out?
Yeah.
Okay, so you got enough for that?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? And multiple phases of at least 2 years. So the intent would be, and this would be an ongoing encouragement of people to do this. And I'll let you develop staff can develop the appropriate language. Was there any other?
I think that
Okay,
was it.
then that's it.
Yeah. Do you have a comment there, Clark?
No, I don't. I understand the motion.
I'll second that. Yes.
Nolan,
Yes?
Becker,
Yes.
Merck,
Yes.
Nicklin.
Yes.
Osborne.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Outside of that, the only comment I want to make, going back to one of the speakers said, is, we really need to work on the real items here. For the most part, the housing element is for developers to decide whether they want to develop a project or not under these restrictions. Then we've got the other potential, which is our city-owned lots. But the two main real components that we're all thinking about are second unit amnesty programs, and then perhaps a future program for the encouragement of building a housing stock that could be in the future used as affordable or low income or some sort of housing. I think that's something we all felt good about. So. And that may take 4 years, which is why I like the 8-year thing, but we have to make progress.
Thank you. We have our council liaison, Carol Smith.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Douglas, have the numbers for population and all been based on the latest census?
Yes, they have.
So the latest census says that the population of Ojai is 7,535.
Well, the latest census was as of 2010,
Right,
which was 3 years ago. So there are estimates that are published every year by the State Department of Finance. So the latest census is 3 years old.
Okay. But in 2000, our population was 7,862. And in 2012, it's 7,535, according to page 6, right?
Yes.
So I'm just not sure where Mr. Daddy has numbers saying 6,000. So I just wanted to correct that impression. To me, we have 7,500 from the last census, which basically goes door to door. But thank you very much for getting this through. I agree with most of your thoughts very much on this, and I think the council will be very anxious to hear what you have to say about it. I do want to pass some good news on, very good news, actually. The Friends of the Library are actually interviewing architects now and have about $500,000 to spend, thanks to some very generous donors who left quite a significant amounts of money in their estates. And these people were just, they loved the library, they died, and they left a lot of money to the library on their estates. So certainly consider the library in your estate planning. And we had been trying to build a meeting room originally with a budget of about $100,000. When I say we, the Ojai Friends and the city has been trying as best we can to help, of course. But the building, the actual library building, is owned by the county. So any plans had to go through the county, and you wouldn't believe the red tape, the numbers they came up with. They're in unbelievable snail pace at going ahead and looking at plans and stuff. So with that background with the county, what the Friends have decided is to basically build behind their bookstore, which is their private property. So basically, the bookstore used to belong to, who owned it for many years? Van Dyke family. So the Van Dykes, if you recall, it also, when the fundraising went around, this is about, 10 years ago or so, not Dick, whatever his name, Jock Van Dyke sold it, and he got a good price for that land. It was $900,000. Fortunately, the donations came in fast, so Friends could pay it off, because he was also wanting 9% interest. So he got a good deal, but we got the land, and there's quite a bit of land behind there. So their plans will include, I believe, keeping the facade as it looks now with the luster tiles and all that. But they're going to be able to have quite a lot of space to add a meeting room on and other possibilities. Perhaps not enough to do a children's library, because that probably won't cover it. But that's very exciting news. It's on private property, so of course the city will help out as best we can with reduced fees, because basically it's our library. So this is going to be a fun project, and requests for proposals from architects are going out now, according to what the Friends told me. So, and hopefully we'll get a local architect to work on it, and it's just going to be wonderful. So I'm very happy to tell you that news. And anyway, thank you for all the work you do.
Thank you.
Oh, Carol, I had a question. The Friends of the Library had actually presented a plan to the Planning Commission. I guess, was it about a year ago?
Yeah, that's
Not that long ago. That's gone and they're
right. They're not adding
starting
the
over.
meeting room onto the county
Okay.
building, because that's on county property.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
They will be coming forward with a concept review, and they're ready for this plan.
Thank you. So with no further business, I'll adjourn the meeting.